Okay, let's come back together. I'd like to hear from someone towards the middle of the room. So the answer to your question, what has your athletic experience taught you? Someone give me an example. Go ahead.
It's taught us to think in critical situations on our feet.
Okay, so being able to think in critical situations. Do you have an example?
For example, in basketball or something, if it's down to the last couple seconds, what are you gonna do? Things like that.
So being able to think in high pressure situations. Someone from this side, go ahead.
I thought discipline.
Okay.
Our coaches just drill that in our head, whether it's something small or big, you need to have discipline, and I think that can transfer over to working in a field with a lot of people.
Okay, so having discipline. Go ahead.
Perseverance,
Okay.
Being able to push through in any real situation. As an athlete, the season can become a grind as far as when it comes to practice, training schedules.
Right.
When an employer sees that you're able to complete that however many years of being an athlete, they see you're committed and you're going to persevere through situations.
Okay. So being able to provide examples of how you persevered through different tough situations. So I think one of the most important things, especially in interviewing, is, again, providing examples. It's better to tell an employer a story as opposed to just saying, I have perseverance, or I'm good at dedication, those different types of things. So being able to tell a story is exactly what that employer is looking for, and it's going to be a way for them to remember who you are. And so here's just a couple of examples. And so in an interview, depending on what question they were asked, from my experience as an athlete, I was required to travel many days a semester to games, practice several hours daily, and carry a full course load. I learned to manage my time very effectively. And then they talk about what they did. So they worked out a practice and study routine, and it resulted in a successful athletic experience, how that ended up resulting for them, and then their final result was having a 3.4 GPA. So basically, they went through to tell them what the problem was, what the situation was they went through, what action they took, which is where they talk about being able to having a practice and study routine, and then what those end results were. And so the end results was being able to take second at the Big Ten championship and maintaining an overall 3.4 GPA. Same thing in the other one. This person had a little bit more experience, and so they talked about some of those experiences that they've gained from their internship. One of the things that's really important to think about as far as just athletic transferable skills in general is that even though you may not have been a collegiate athlete, professional athlete, but most of us have done something in high school, but depending on who you're working with, you can help them figure out the best way to be able to talk about these things. So even though I know it seemed like, I asked the same question for all three of the different scenarios, but there really are different ways to talk about your experiences. So the way you talk about it in a resume versus the way you talk about it in a cover letter and the way you talk about it in an interview, you might still be talking about leadership, but the way you give those examples is going to be different based off of what you're doing. So you may think you're being repetitive, but really you're just giving them different ways of seeing how you've been able to accomplish those skills. So it's really important to think about, how these can be marketable, and then what's the best avenue to place them in. And so as far as, like I said, so you'll be working with people who may need that type of advice from you. And so you'll be able to help them, even at the high school level, asking, what has your athletic experience taught you? I think that's one of the hardest questions some of our student athletes have whenever we've had our interviews with student athletes, and we're like, what has athletics taught you? They know what it has, but being able to express it is way different from just writing it out on a piece of paper or knowing it in your head. So these are different things that we try to incorporate with our student athletes so that they can express how being a student athlete is valuable. And so I know when we were at the career event, Nate had to talk to some employers about his experiences and how his athletic experiences were valuable to him as a student now and the different things that he's interested in doing. So are there any questions about interviewing? Okay, so that's the end of the interviewing section. What I just wanted to do, since you guys are in the sport industry majors, just talk a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to do with our student athletes to help incorporate ways for them to gain experiences and then being able to talk about their experiences. So we've implemented recently, just last fall, a 4-year career plan. And so basically it went from what you see on the left with Brutus holding up the sign to our proposal to Gene Smith, and then over at the end is the final proposal we came up with. And so what we found out is that because there's so many time demands for student athletes, is that if we don't make things mandatory, they're not going to go to them. But we can't make everything mandatory for our students. And so what we did was we decided that there'd be one thing mandatory that they have to do each year, and then the rest of the things were optional but suggested. And so the first year students have to do a career assessment. Our second year students have to do a resume. Third year students have to do a career consultation, and then our fourth years have to do some type of networking with employers. And so we're trying to purposely give them opportunities to be able to utilize, to be able to talk about some of the things that they've gained and learned through being a student athlete and how those things can transfer over to the workforce, because we're hoping that the earlier we get them into some of these things, they'll just start wanting to do some more of it on their own, because we do know that they're here for school and their sport, and so they spend a lot of time in their sport, and there's not as much time for some of the other things that are going to make them a more marketable candidate once they graduate. So we have implemented the 4-year career plan. We're in our second year of it, and so still just working through some of the kinks, but it's just another way to give them the opportunity to be able to talk about their athletic transferable skills. And with that, do you guys have any questions about anything in general? Yes.
Students, whether they're student athletes or not, want to help student athletes in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's what you do. So can you talk a little bit about your career path?
Yes, so I graduated from Kansas State University with my undergrad in social work, and then I got my master's degree in college student development from Kansas State University. Part of the reason that I got my master's degree was because I was watching a football game one day, and I saw like all the students, the football players for K-State had majors in sociology, and although there's nothing wrong with being a sociology major, the advice I had been given as a student was that it was one of the hardest ones to make yourself marketable in. And so I knew that there was a struggle with having a very general degree, because there's so much you can do, and then not knowing exactly what you want to do when there's all these opportunities in front of you. And so I was like, I'm going to be the person to help, them figure it out, this type of thing. And so I went to grad school, got my degree, realized that it's not as easy as I thought it would be to try to get them to major in other things. But so I did that, and then I ended up working for 10 years at Kansas State University in the Career Services Office, and I was the unofficial liaison to the athletic department. So anytime a student athlete came in, I was the one that they were scheduling with. I did all the presentations for our student athletes over in the athletic department, and then one day I saw a Twitter post about this position here at The Ohio State University, and I applied to it, and 2 years later, here I am. But it really was just like a Twitter post that I saw about this position, and that's how I applied for my role here. And again, it was a brand new position, so it hadn't existed before, and so it's kind of still in the infancy stages, even though I'm going into my 3rd year, just trying to figure out what works best for our student athletes. So. Yes.
And your degree was higher ed?
Yes, college student development.
So can you explain what that is?
And so it's a higher ed degree, but basically it's just like how to work with college students. And so some places might call it college student personnel, other places might call it student affairs, and so there's just different names for it, but it's all, to me, it's pretty much everything outside of academics is what my degree was for, everything outside of working on the academic side. So. Other questions, comments, or concerns?
If students do have championships, I know I've experienced that students have national championships or state championships or conference championships, and they're too humble to mention it, and then they don't mention it. So what is an effective way to represent that in the resume, in the cover letter, and in interviews?
Right, so I would definitely, so the question was about like how to incorporate national championships, state championships, Big Ten championships, whatever the case may be. And so you're right, students can be very humble, and there's times when I've met with student athletes and we're talking about some of the things that they've done, and I'm like, why don't you have your Big Ten championship, or why don't you have your national championship on there? And they're like, oh, I just didn't think that was important to the employer or whatever. And so I think that depending on how you write it, you can include it in your resume under honors and awards. You can definitely talk about it in a cover letter if you're talking about how much time and commitment you've put to your sport. In an interview, you can give an example of it. So there's definitely different ways to talk about your championships, because they are important to the employer, because not everyone gets a championship of any sort. So being able to talk about how you were able to work towards getting that championship is really important. Okay. All right then. Well, I think that sums up everything that we were, the focus was for. So talking about resumes, cover letters, interviewing. Transferable skills are just those skills that can be transferred from one thing to another. And then athletic transferable skills, pretty much the same way. The skills that you gain from athletics, how they can be transferred to a position or work experience. So with that, thank you guys very much.